Hi, I'm Jennifer Collins. We are here live from the COP24 Climate Conference in Katowice, Poland for DW. And today we are talking to two special guests. First is Ilka Wagner, Deputy Head of the German delegation, and also Ottaro, Executive Director of Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa. So we're going to talk a little bit about, the issues around climate change in each country, in Kenya where Alan is from, and in Germany where Ilka is from, about what both countries are doing, and also some of the issues in coming to an agreement here on the rule book to implement the Paris Agreement here at COP24. So perhaps we'll start with Alan and ask you a little bit about the impacts of climate change that you are feeling in Kenya.
Yes, I would say this morning when I woke up, I was trying to read the news of what's happening back in Kenya, because today also happens to be our Independence Day, 12th of December. And the first story I saw was that 300 families in the western part of Kenya have been displaced because there was 5 hours of rainfall last night. And now they're displaced, they don't have a place to live. And this is just one example of what has become a more recurrent pattern in Kenya. We are experiencing more severe droughts, more often. And for communities that, for example, live in the north and that depend on livestock, pastoralist communities, they don't even have time to recover when the next rainfall season comes. So next time it rains, the rain is also too much. And even if it rains for the next consecutive years, they're not able to recover their livestock stocks because it takes some time to build this kind of resilience and to be able to recover their livelihoods. Also in urban areas, in the last few years, very high temperatures have been recorded in cities like Nairobi, for example. I saw a study recently that in terms of vulnerability, African cities are some of the most vulnerable places. If you think of people who live in, for example, slum settlements, they live in accommodation made out of iron sheets, for example. And so nobody is really talking about or analyzing what happens in terms of the heat and the heat that people have to endure in their houses. And I know that this has also been an issue now in Europe. I was reading the reports earlier this year about during the summer season, how hot it was and the kind of chaos it caused. And this is something that we've been experiencing for quite some while. It's becoming it's being called the new normal. But I don't think we should even think about calling it normal, because I think everybody has a right to a clean and safe environment. And especially for myself as a young person, looking at a continent like Africa where something like 60% of the population is below the age of 25. I feel that for us as young people, we even have a more crucial stake in what is happening here, in terms of the impacts that we feel now, but also what will happen to us in the future, and also the people who are coming after us, our younger brothers and sisters and cousins and so on. Thinking of my own cousin in my own family who's 9 years old, I wonder what kind of world she will live in if we do not do what's required.
So I should also mention that you could leave comments or any questions that you may have for Alan and for Ilka in the comment section below the video. But I know Germany has been feeling the impacts of climate change as well. There's been a big drought, there have been floods in the past couple of years. I mean, you've been involved in the negotiations for a long time, and it's obviously an urgent issue for Germany. But what is your kind of main goals here at the climate conference? What are you really trying to push?
Our main goal as Germany and also as the EU, as we are part of the EU, is really to live up to the spirit of Paris, which is that the world stands together to achieve ambitious climate change and to keep in the end the 1.5 degree target, because it sounds a little bit abstract when I say that, but it means exactly to minimize the impacts of climate change throughout the world, including Africa, which is heavily impacted by climate change. And as you said, Germany also felt the impact last summer with a heavy drought, but that's really nothing compared to what we see in other parts of the world. And we have to live up to our responsibility as a country, as Germany, which has contributed to the problem of climate change a lot as an industrialized country. And therefore our aim here is to finalize this rule book, to have clear rules, to know what countries are doing at home, and to know where we stand with mitigation that directly relates, of course, to adaptation. And we stand ready as Germany definitely to do our fair share to support countries to cope with the impact of climate change, especially in developing countries, as we have contributed 1.5 billion euros to the Green Climate Fund, which finances projects on adaptation and mitigation. So in the end, what we want to achieve here is to show solidarity with developing countries and to do our fair share to minimize the problem. And in the end, we have to live up to the Paris spirit. And this year is not a step back from Paris. It's the next step. And I really do hope that we will succeed until Friday here, or let's say Saturday.
I'm just wondering, in terms of you've spoken about countries doing their fair share, and in my understanding, this being my first COP, I've been listening around what's happening, and one of the discussions I've had about is, for example, the contribution of phasing out fossil fuels to contribute to these, mitigation targets. And I've been reading a bit about what's happening in Germany, for example, and if I understand correctly, I think it's gone slowly than it should have. I think now there's a commission that's been tasked with finding out how to phase out the coal plants in a much more efficient and quicker way. What would you say, in your view, are the stumbling blocks to countries achieving these kinds of the targets that they have set, even domestically, these nationally determined contributions?
Yeah, that's indeed a very good question, and I don't know as much about Kenyan climate policy as you know about Germany climate policy, I have to admit. I would say the main stumbling blocks, looking at the German example, are that you really have different interests. When you look at a country like Germany, we heavily rely still on coal. Even when you compare to the fact that we have a high share of renewable energy, and we really, I think, have seen a success story there, because we also have exported technology and also the frameworks that we have in Germany to enhance the share of renewables. We really have exported this idea worldwide. But still you have the old structures, you still have the old interests and the old industries, and people who earn their money there and people who work there, they find the idea not very conducive or to imagine that they would lose their jobs. And this is a very heavy debate and intense debate at the moment in Germany. And this is what many people, especially when you look at the people who work in coal mines, for instance, this is what they understand, or they understand when they say just transition, which is also a negotiation issue here. They understand just transition as they are being affected in a socially unfair way if they would lose their jobs. And I think the structural change you need, you have to start with that very early, and we did not start with that early enough in Germany. That's indeed one of the main problems, I would say, why we're in a situation now that coal has still, when you look at the energy supply, around 40% share of the energy mix in Germany. So that's quite high, and you can imagine that a number of coal-fired power plants are still working. And I think this commission, which is called Commission on Structural Change, some call it Coal Commission and some call it Coal Phase-Out Commission. That's the reason why this commission was established, because you have a lot of social conflicts and also, of course, economic interests there. And all those who represent these interests, they are together in this commission, together with people affected from the region where the coal mines are, especially lignite, and also environmental NGOs are represented there. And they will propose a plan to phase out coal in January now. And the good thing is that as of today, nobody really questions anymore in Germany that we have to phase out coal. That was totally different to 10 years ago, indeed. And that really has changed. Now the question is, when do we do it? It's not the question if we do it, but it comes along with a lot of debates, and it's not easy. It's not just done with a finger snippet.
I think for me that's an interesting point that you raise. Coming here, I was reading a bit about this COP and what some of the crunch issues would be, and I kept hearing this term, just transition, and I'm wondering, because in some of our African countries there have been discoveries also of, for example, coal deposits or oil deposits, for example, in northern Kenya now. But we also, a lot of our countries in Africa are also the countries with the highest potential for renewable energies. I mean, we have the sun literally 12 months a year. Wind energy is also a huge potential, and so on. And I'm wondering, what is it that we could learn from this experience of this movement, not just being an environmental issue, but also a social issue, as we've seen now in France with the Yellow Jacket movement. What could we learn from that in terms of taking steps and being strategic about how we move forward, of utilizing the renewable energy sources that we have, but keeping the social structure intact in terms of having good environmental systems?
Yeah, that's for us in Germany, and I think in every country, as you said, that's really a key question, because when you look at the structural, so-called structural change that is needed, looking at the energy supply system, it has to be set up differently. Looking at the way we are mobile, so our mobility has to be totally different. Speaking now from an industrialist country's perspective, but also speaking about keeping the coal in the ground, which I find difficult. No industrialized country wants to impose on another country the commitment, keep it in the ground, because countries have to decide that for themselves. But then at the same time you have to have interesting alternatives. And I think when you don't do it in a socially just way, when you don't do it in a fair way, then it's not possible to succeed. And this is the big question also for us to answer: how to organize that transformation that is fair towards our own people in the present, in our own countries, but also for future generations and for people who live in other countries. Then this is the meaning from our perspective of just transition. It's not just this national and this just now perspective. It's a big question.
Okay, so we actually have to wrap up now. Our time is up, but I'd like to thank you both for joining us here, Ilka Wagner and Ottaro. It's been a very interesting discussion, I think, and I think we kind of brought out some of the issues around why it is actually quite difficult to kind of bring all these interests together. But thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having us.
And if you want to leave any questions or comments, you can do so underneath the video, and we can continue to answer them for you. Thanks.